and welcome to another episode of the Chaplain's Compass, a podcast for interfaith chaplains. I am Elise Tremaine.
And I'm John Betts. So I'm really excited about the guest that we have today. We have Stephen Lewis, or Steve Lewis. He is a board-certified chaplain at UC San Diego Health, and he's also a co-convener of the transformative Chaplaincy psychedelic care network. So one of the pieces that we wanted to talk about is a lot of things that have been coming up in a lot of the discussions have been around the use of psychedelics within the area of spiritual health, spiritual care, providing support to people who are hurting or people who want some sort of spiritual breakthrough. So to be honest, I'm really excited to have you here, Steve. I know that you've been presenting a few times on this topic. And so could you tell us more about yourself? Like, how did you get into chaplaincy, but also what got you interested in this area?
Sure. Thanks for having me, John and Elise. It's good to be with you. I've listened to all the episodes available thus far. I did it voluntarily even before you reached out for this talk. So
thank you so
good
much.
on you for doing that. Yeah. So I've been a chaplain for about 10 years. I got board certified about 5 years ago. I came into chaplaincy. There was kind of a life transition going on for me in terms of I used to be a university chaplain through a denomination that I used to be affiliated with, and they were kind of getting out of the university chaplaincy business, as it were. And so I was relieved of my duties. And so looking for other opportunities, and my tradition that I had grown up in, CPE, wasn't really something that was put forward. It wasn't part of seminary education. It wasn't part of ordination process, anything like that. So there was a local chaplain residency position open for me, and I went into that and went in with a bit of trepidation because being in hospitals, I didn't think was kind of my jam. And yet, once I got in there, it was an immediate connection. Really felt not only compelled by the work of chaplaincy, but also felt like, oh, wow, I would not have guessed it, but I think I might be wired for this. And so, I did that straight out of my residency year here in San Diego. I went into hospice and then ended up kind of balancing my career with hospice and hospital kind of chaplaincy. Even in the hospital, obviously doing a lot of palliative care work, but also a lot of critical care. I kind of became an ICU specialist. But in terms of what interested me in psychedelics, it was when I was a hospice chaplain, I would drive around from one patient's house to another patient's house, and I would listen to podcasts on a wide range of topics. But some of the podcasts that I was listening to back in, I guess this was 2015 or so, they started talking about psychedelics. And my first reaction was, I'm a white, middle-aged, boring, kind of middle-of-the-road dude. I had never had any experience with any kind of drugs, including marijuana even, pretty square, right? And so when I started hearing about psychedelics, it was, I kind of gave it the same side eye that a lot of people do. But among the studies, the research studies that were cited, were a couple of studies that talked about psychedelics and the mystical experience. And people, the participants in these studies, talking about how their psychedelic experience for depression or anxiety, whatever the research study was on, these experiences were among the most important experiences of their whole life, on par with the birth of a child or the death of a parent.
No kidding.
Yeah, some of the research that was documented in the early 2000s indicates that the people are saying this is the single most important event of my whole life. And when I started hearing language like that, my chaplain ears really perked up, and I thought, okay, now this is something that I can dig into. And I'm enough of a nerd that I did start digging in for the last 9 years or so.
Wow. So first of all, I think a lot of people can relate to your story of, I never really thought chaplaincy was something that I would enjoy until I was in it. Because, you know, for somebody who hasn't really had any experiences with chaplaincy, it can really seem like a depressing kind of job from the outside and or just, not really knowing what all the fulfillment that people get from a job like that. What you said about the mystical experiences and finding that attunement for yourself, I wonder, when you were practicing as a chaplain, even before that, were the mystical experiences part of what attracted you to chaplaincy, that kind of priestly role, or how did you connect your personality and your vocation with chaplaincy?
I think in terms of the mystical experience side of things, I'll be honest, that is not something that was common in the tradition I grew up in.
Okay.
I wasn't a holy roller or anything like that. So that part of it would have been a little foreign to me, except that I think the thing that really drew me in was part of my own wiring. Is one of the things that my CPE experience included was a lot of talk on Enneagram, and I'm a very textbook Enneagram type 9. So I have this kind of mellow, calm presence anyway. What I discovered was I have this capacity to absorb a lot of intensity and not get overwhelmed by it in the moment. And especially in critical care, in trauma, kind of environments in the hospital, I would just function pretty seamlessly and comfortably. And that took me by surprise for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. So then, can you expand a little bit on some of the misconceptions about psychedelics? Because, honestly, for somebody who doesn't know a whole lot, the image for some of us might be, these celebrities going to these expensive retreats, like Will Smith taking ayahuasca. What is the reality of who's taking psychedelics? What's the context? And what are some misconceptions that people have about it?
The misconceptions, a lot of that has to do with, like you said, the celebrities doing ayahuasca retreats, maybe going into the jungles of Peru or Brazil, things like that. That's one set of misconceptions. Another popular image would be the hippies, the counterculture types, the people that would follow the Grateful Dead around the country, or the cool kids in the rave scene, going to the music festivals and taking different psychedelics, things like that. I think that's part of the misconception, but in terms of who actually is taking these medicines, to be honest, there's still a lot of those types that are. There is still a lot of use at music festivals and concerts, and one of the hospitals that I used to work in is in Northern California, where there's a lot of sort of off-the-grid hippie types, and there's still plenty of use in the underground. But in terms of what you might term the newer generation of psychedelics users, it's taking place increasingly in very sort of sanitary lab environments. A lot of the research studies, they're done at major universities like Johns Hopkins University or NYU or UCLA, and so they're taking place in scientific kinds of environments under scientific conditions. So that's one set of people that are using it. But over the past several years, especially I'd say in the last 5-6 years, there's been a significant culture shift around that. There's a major book that came out by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. That was a big source of discovery for a lot of people. There are lots of Netflix documentaries. In fact, there's a documentary series on Netflix by that same title, How to Change Your Mind. They kind of adapted it for the video medium. And so there's increased cultural awareness. And so I think there are a lot of people that see the therapeutic benefit for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and we have a mental health crisis in this country. And so a lot of people are sort of impatient for FDA to license these drugs and the DEA to deschedule them. And so they're just kind of using themselves. They might be able to grow their own mushrooms at home in their closet and just use them in that way with a therapeutic or even a spiritual intention, but not in necessarily a therapeutic environment, if that makes sense.
As I'm thinking about this, one of the areas that comes to my mind is within Christianity and I believe it also in Islam. Islam has a tradition of Sufism, which is it's a very mystical, it emphasizes mystical experiences. And within Christianity, there's been a lot of people such as like Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, other people, Thomas à Kempis, where a lot of times there's a lot of emphasis on mystical experiences tied to the devotion to something transcendent. So it's interesting to see how this is being tied together by use of within the area of spiritual health.
Yeah, for sure. And, the use of psychedelics dates back thousands of years. There's a ton of archaeological evidence where psychedelic medicines, whether it's magic mushrooms or some other form of psychedelic substance, have been found with the body of a shaman, for example, or some substances that date to certain ritual or ceremonial use, and that's across a number of different traditions, including ancient Christian traditions. But it does tie very closely to mystical experience, and even within the scientific psychedelic research community, there are a lot of references to the now 100-year-old work by William James, the varieties of spiritual experience, or the varieties of religious experience, and it talks about some of that mystical stuff, if you will. And even one of the studies that Johns Hopkins and NYU did together was a study giving psychedelic medicines, giving psilocybin to religious leaders of a number of different faith groups. We're awaiting the publication of the results of that, but I happen to know a few of the participants in that study, and it's had a pretty profound experience across different religious traditions.
Interesting.
So much so that an Episcopal priest who was part of the study ended up leaving his priestly ministry and starting a Christian nonprofit as a Christian psychedelic society.
Oh, wow.
It's a group called Ligare. And there's a Jewish rabbi that was part of the same study, and he also entered a new phase of his vocation. His name is Rabbi Zach Kamenetz, and he started a nonprofit called Shefa, which is a Jewish psychedelic society. And so this is across a number of different traditions. It's having a pretty significant impact.
So it sounds like some people are turning to psychedelics specifically for a mystical or spiritual practice. Is it also possible or fair to say that for some, it's primarily to treat anxiety or depression, but could they have a mystical experience or a spiritual experience as an unexpected side effect or end result of that experience? Does that also happen?
Yes. The only thing I would quibble with in the way that you asked that question is the use of the word unexpected. The reality that we're coming to terms with in all of the modern research over the past 20 years or so is that the mystical or spiritual experience is actually very predictable. The quality or the nature of it is still kind of a lot of unknowns there, but people are reliably and consistently having mystical experiences while in this non-ordinary state of consciousness. And very importantly, those experiences are being seen as mediators of clinical improvement. And there are a couple of studies that have indicated that the people that have the strongest mystical experience are the people that experience the most clinical improvement in their behavioral health symptoms.
That's fascinating.
We may have talked about this, but what substances are we talking about? What are typically used, and how do their use get facilitated? How are they able to take them?
There are a number of different substances under investigation right now. The most widely studied substance right now is it's a synthetic form of psilocybin, which is the substance in magic mushrooms. And so that's being widely studied for things like depression, anxiety, especially end-of-life anxiety in the palliative care context. It's being looked at for demoralization, things like that. But then also very prominently in the news these days is MDMA, or what the street version is called ecstasy or Molly. But MDMA is very close to being licensed by FDA for the use of PTSD assisted therapies. And so obviously that's a big one, especially within the veterans community. There's a great need for approaches to help people with really treatment-resistant conditions like PTSD. LSD has been investigated in depression and anxiety as well. Ketamine, it's not considered by some to be a classic psychedelic, but it's because it's already in use and it's already licensed by FDA for anesthetics during surgery. It also has some antidepressant, anti-anxiety effects. And so that's being studied quite a lot. And then there are some others. There are new ones being investigated all the time. But in the clinical environment, it's usually given, these substances are most frequently administered to participants within the context of therapeutic support. And so a common model for psychedelic-assisted therapies is having two co-facilitators. Could be a physician, a psychologist, a mental health practitioner, a licensed person. It could be a nurse practitioner. And in a handful of studies, also chaplains are facilitators, and they will meet with a participant or a care seeker for some initial screening and preparation to describe common experiences and do a thorough screening to make sure that this is an appropriate form of work for a person. And then there's one or more medication sessions, and those can range from 4 to 6 hours all the way up to 8 to 10 hours, depending on the drug effect of the substance being studied. And then there's follow-up support given, what's called integration sessions, again, with the two co-therapists who help the individual talk through their experience, the kinds of insights that they may have had, what their experiences were, and how to kind of make meaning of all of that. And that's one of the real gifts that I believe chaplains have to offer, is that we're already in that meaning-making kind of domain, and that's right in our wheelhouse.
It seems like such an emerging and growing field at the moment. And I'm curious, what training is there for chaplains who want to either be more skilled or be positioned, just are curious and want to learn more in that field? What is there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good and important question, especially, do chaplains need to know anything? I would argue yes. A few weeks ago, my team at UC San Diego, we got a page, and it was a page to our burn unit. And the page said something like, please visit this patient in this room. The patient received a burn while in a peyote ceremony and still wants to continue in their spiritual experience. Well, I wasn't the chaplain on duty in the burn unit that day, but my colleague, who has an awareness of psychedelics because he knows me, but he had to go in and help somebody understand or sort of try to make sense of this experience that he was having. So there are issues like that. For chaplains on that level, I'd say there's emerging research, emerging study going on about the nature of psychedelics. There's kind of some intro-level journal articles that could be of use, watching some of these documentaries and just trying to get a sense of what people are experiencing and get a sense of people's stories. So that would be sort of the entry level. And then doing more self-study would be sort of another level. There are a number of certificate programs that are out there and available that are kind of 10-month-long, pretty intensive certificate programs. UC Berkeley has one, Naropa University. There's a school in California called the California Institute for Integral Studies. So that kind of training would be for chaplains that are looking for a deep dive and are really interested in engaging this at a deep level. And between the sort of dabbling in the mainstream materials and the deep dive, there's a lot of variation in between, but this would be a really clever place for someone to put in a plug for an organization that one is involved in. I'm the co-convener of Transforming Chaplaincy Psychedelic Care Network, like you mentioned at the beginning. We are a group of chaplains. There's over a couple hundred of us across the U.S., some internationally, who gather on a monthly basis to engage research and hear presentations from different researchers and academics and practitioners about what this looks like and how to become involved. And we're developing an ongoing community of people, of chaplains that are interested in learning more and exploring this and perhaps participating as we have ability to do so.
So this is fascinating. Thank you so much, Steve. One of the pieces that's swimming in my mind is if someone wants to get really involved with this, specifically chaplains, what are the opportunities, the competencies that chaplains need in order to best serve and to best plug into this type of specialty?
Yeah, this is a really important, valuable question and pursuit. So much so that I've been working along with a working group as part of our Transforming Chaplaincy Psychedelic Care Network to develop a set of competencies. We are hoping to publish this in a journal within the next few months. Even this morning, I was editing that article. And so it's a product of a couple of years of work with this working group to develop these competencies. There's a lot of overlap, actually, between our competencies and the competencies necessary for board certification. And yet, even some of the competencies that we suggest, like spiritual and religious care, for example, that most chaplains, board certified chaplains, would look at those things and say, oh yeah, I already got that. Well, maybe not. In our competencies, we're suggesting that these are particular competencies within the context of psychedelic care. And so like ministry of presence is something that would be very common, but what does it look like when your ministry of presence isn't during a patient interaction for 15 minutes to an hour? Maybe it's for 8 hours. What does that look like? How is that different? People talking about the mystical experiences that they're having. Chaplains are accustomed to talking about these issues with patients that we visit all the time, but are we accustomed to interacting with the care seeker while they're actually having the mystical experience? And how does that change? So things like that, we believe the chaplains need to invest themselves highly in education, because there are a lot of our competencies are not common to chaplaincy. Things like having a working knowledge of what the drug effects are, what are the risk profiles, things like that, because this is not for everyone. And we need to be very clear about that. We're not psychedelic evangelists here, but we need to do things that promote healthy, safe therapeutic use. And so ethics are another big area of competency. And there's a very deep dive that we do in terms of what ethical conduct might look like and what are the issues that are pertinent. And then another one of our competencies, frankly, right now, I just said we're not psychedelic evangelists, and yet we do need to be chaplaincy evangelists at some level. We chaplains are often in healthcare. We're the forgotten little children that are called on only in very specific situations. Well, that's the same in psychedelic-assisted therapies. And advocacy for chaplains is one of our competencies, because this is actually a phase that we're in right now. This is a major ethical issue within the psychedelic research community, is that these participants are having mystical spiritual experiences, but most commonly it's licensed therapists that are the facilitators. And the vast majority of therapists do not get any training in religious and spiritual issues. And so we are the subject matter experts. We need to be there. And even if we're not in the room, they need to be at least consulting with us, because there are a lot of people, for example, there's a lot of spiritual risks involved in this. Think about somebody that have PTSD. Well, what if the index trauma that produced the PTSD symptoms was within a religious or spiritual context? A lot of people have experienced religious abuse. So chaplains have an extra insight that we have to apply to that. And so all that to say, we're advocating for the presence of chaplains as a core competency for our work in this field.
Would many chaplains feel comfortable with being able to walk people through those situations? For example, if somebody's having an adverse reaction to the psychedelic, so-called bad trip, but like, would they feel comfortable with being able to, okay, let's, listen to my voice, and the ethical questions which would arise from that, being adept at being able to say, well, what are the effects of the substances, and being able to say, oh, okay, well, this is normal. And being the typical chaplains, being able to say, oh, what you're experiencing is very normal, and normalizing that.
Depending on the substance being studied, they trying to normalize the effects like that wouldn't necessarily be what you would want to do, in that people that are in a non-ordinary state of consciousness are not what you would call rational. And so it's not uncommon for people to have very challenging experiences, including some that might be described as quote unquote bad trips. But there's a couple of things there. One, once they have ingested the substance, we can't turn that off. We don't have that ability. And so our non-anxious presence in that space to calm them, reassure them, making sure that they are medically safe, but also psychologically safe. There's often an encouragement to take the challenging experience. It might be terrifying for someone, and just say, we're here, I'll hold your hand, but pay attention to what you're experiencing right now and ask if there's something you can learn from it. And that often opens people's heart up to stay with the hard stuff and learn from it, experience it at a deep level. And the research that's out there indicates that even people who have these really hard, challenging experiences often will still say after the fact, yeah, that was really hard. I'm not sure I ever want to do that again, but that was still one of the most important experiences of my life. And I'm really grateful for it. And I would not change that if I had a chance.
That's really interesting. Now, I'm sure there are regulations for providing this kind of experience in a clinical therapeutic environment, but what about nonprofits, churches, and others who are offering retreats and facilitated experiences? Are there regulations for them and the kind of training that they need to have?
That's a really good question, and it's one that's very much in development. There are a number of religious exemptions that have been given for a long time now. The first was the Native American Church became a Supreme Court case, actually, in the U.S. To use peyote in a ceremonial way. Since then, there are a few other religious organizations, like there's a religious community out of Brazil called Santo Daime, another church called UDV that implement the use of ayahuasca in religious ceremony. So on the heels of that, again, I think out of sort of a sense of impatience with FDA and licensing and legalization kinds of issues, there are a number of new churches that are popping up. And those churches might have ceremonial use of some psychedelic substance. Those churches exist in a bit of a legal gray zone for the time being. And some people are skeptical, probably rightly so, of some of these churches. Is this just kind of a cover so that people can do drugs, things like that? So that's one aspect. But in terms of licensure, it's a tricky zone that we're in right now because with the exception of Oregon and Colorado, there is no legal use of psychedelics outside of ketamine. And outside of actual research process. How those facilitators get licensed is a state-by-state issue, and some of the states are going to defer to who are the currently licensed professionals, like marriage and family therapists or nurses or social workers. There's a good, solid, safe rationale for that, but also as a chaplain, that puts me out, right? I'm not a licensed therapist. There is no license, national or state level license for chaplains. And so we've got some legal advocacy to do in that regard as well. So, yeah, some more work.
What else would you like to see in the future of psychedelic chaplaincy, Steve? I'm hearing you say licensing and a case for chaplains to be certified or recognized as a leader in this space. What else?
Once FDA starts licensing some of these medicines, whether it's MDMA or within the next 5 years, I would anticipate multiple substances being licensed for clinical use. Probably MDMA is the first. Psilocybin will be maybe a year behind that. And I think in terms of chaplaincy, I would love for this to get integrated into the work of palliative care chaplains first. There's already an integrated team model for the use of chaplains, and so it's seamless in that way. And the kinds of conditions that are being studied are conditions that palliative care patients face all the time: depression, anxiety, demoralization, end-of-life concerns, things like that. And so if we could get somebody that has maybe a new terminal diagnosis, if we could take a person that's experiencing the shock, the immediate kind of anxiety of that diagnosis, poor prognosis, that kind of thing, and give them a wholehearted, facilitated, safe kind of experience to process some of that end-of-life anxiety, we could very substantially alter the course of their final months or years of life, and we could really make some powerful change. So that's one area. Behavioral health is another really big area. We already have a lot of chaplains working in those environments, and so things like PTSD, especially there are a ton of our chaplain colleagues who are working in the VA. Actually, this week, I'm going to sit in on an education session for our VA CPE students in San Diego, who will have a talk by a psychologist doing a psilocybin trial. And in the VA and the military kind of ecosystem, chaplains are already an accepted, important, functioning member of the team. So put us to use in this domain as well. So I think those two are the first that I would see for our near future.
And going with that, as you're talking about this, for me, it'd be interesting to hear, could you give like a walkthrough, a kind of a case study that you've experienced? Because I'd love to kind of get a picture of how does this work? What did you see? And in terms of helping provide that kind of care to somebody who's a patient, of course, keeping HIPAA and keeping confidentiality in mind.
Sure. Well, I will, I guess, change the response from a personal experience because I don't work in a state where there's legal practice. I don't have a personal connection to clinical research studies that I am a part of. So I can't answer that from a personal experience level. However, I would encourage you and your listeners to go onto YouTube and Google a Georgia Public Broadcasting documentary series called Your Fantastic Mind. And one of the episodes is on psychedelics, and they went inside a palliative care psilocybin study at Emory University, and Chaplain George Grant is featured in that episode, and they actually go inside even treatment sessions with this young man named Wesley, and it is a really powerful story. It goes through his cancer journey, which took place during COVID, in addition to a very serious life-threatening cancer condition that he had. His father also died of cancer, and he was the primary caregiver, and just a lot of depression and demoralization that he was experiencing. So this documentary goes through some of the cancer treatment aspects of his story, but then also in the preparation stages for his psilocybin experience, and then in the session. There's session footage. There's an interview with him a week after his psilocybin experience, and they do a side-by-side screenshot of his face, and it looks like a different person. And I happen to know, I was in a group just a few months ago, where this young man, Wesley, was telling his story. And it's been a year and a half since his psilocybin experience, and he is now a divinity school student, right? It had a profound impact on him, and he now wants to give back, and he wants to continue his studies and be a psychedelic facilitator himself because of his own powerful experience. So yeah, look that up on YouTube. It's a really fantastic story.
I know that Emory had a specific consortium that took place that looked into psychedelics, and they actually have a center at Emory called the Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. I live in Atlanta. I didn't know that, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. They are one of a few that are doing some fantastic work. George Grant and his team. My former co-convener, she was one of the founders of our psychedelic care network, Chaplain Caroline Peacock. She actually published a really important qualitative analysis as a journal article that goes inside chaplains providing psychedelic care and what are some of the qualities that they're able to offer to the care seekers. So it's a really well-documented kind of study.
Well, I know we just have been scratching the surface on this topic because there's so much to learn about. Would it be okay to share a link to the Psychedelic Care Network on the show notes?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're always welcoming new folks into our environment. And, this is all still new. So we're all kind of learning together here.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I personally don't know enough, so now I know where I can go and look for more information. But it's really encouraging to hear that it's making such a big difference in people's lives and that they are getting such meaning out of it, and that chaplains are able to help in this really innovative, in quotes, because as you said, it's also really ancient.
One of the sentences in our journal article on the competencies is actually, rather than spirituality catching up to science, it's the exact opposite. Science is trying now to reckon with and catch up to spiritual experience in a new and powerful way.
We always like to ask people, what is giving you life these days, Steve?
I think what's giving me life is trying to have fun more. I enjoy my relationship with my wife and my dog, and I live half a mile from the beach, so obviously there's a lot of opportunity for me to enjoy good things in life, but sometimes I get so nerdy and so serious as a chaplain that I don't play enough. And over the past couple of years, I have engaged at a deeper level with a longtime love of mine, which is soccer. I've become part of a local soccer supporters group, and we're the rowdies that are banging on the drums and waving flags and singing at the top of our lungs for 90 minutes. Yeah. I'm in a group like that, and actually we're preparing now. In 2025 will be the inaugural season of our first Major League Soccer club here in San Diego. So, so we have a lot of energy around that. So we're trying to play.
That's fantastic.
I love that. And as a Brazilian, of course, I fully support, wholly endorse that choice.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Steve. We will make sure that people know how to find the video that you recommended and the Psychedelic Care Network.
Thank you so much for your time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, it went fast. I appreciate what you all are doing, and appreciate the time to be able to participate.
And now it's time for the non-anxious presence
with John and
Elise. Well, John, I never asked you what your Enneagram is. It totally makes sense for me that Steve is an Enneagram 9, and the way that he described chaplaincy and just his interest in psychedelic chaplaincy.
It's funny. I joke that I'm a 10.
You're all of them.
Partially because I'm a helper. It was the last time. I hear it's very common for a lot of chaplains, but for me, I don't rely too much on the Enneagram. I'm not anti-Enneagram. It's more just like, it's one of those things that's out there that's like, oh, that's cool. And
well, I love the Enneagram, but I love all kinds of personality assessments and just like to understand more about yourself. And that's a whole other conversation. But I'm an Enneagram 3, which is supposed to be like the achiever, but I'm a wing too, which is, also the helper in there. But when I was training as a chaplain and then reflecting on what my pastoral identity was and what I appreciated about chaplaincy and all of the materials for certification, I remember writing a lot about the priestly role and how much I enjoyed that. And that's why I was asking Steve that question, because for me, a lot of it is prayer, where I am, the context that I work at. But I love those rituals and the opportunity to facilitate a ritual or to pray in a way for a patient that's meaningful to them. And I find that so meaningful. I know that's different from facilitating a psychedelic mystical experience, but I think there's some commonality there.
But I think you're really onto it. As I'm thinking about it, the most experiential pieces to, I can speak from Christianity and from a sacramental perspective, is that it's very experiential. This idea, the smells of the incense, the taste of the wine, the taste of the bread, the feeling of water pouring down upon you. From what I could hear Steve talk about, it was almost like the sacramental aspect. This was beautiful within psychedelics, whereas this means of experiencing the grace of God. It was a beautiful opportunity, I think, that chaplains well-trained could learn more about.
Yeah, I do think that he made a very good case about chaplains being uniquely positioned to be able to facilitate that with folks, because we do understand spiritual experience and spiritual trauma and making meaning out of religious and spiritual experiences. So I think he's right that we have a unique opportunity. And I also appreciate the emphasis on, okay, let's have some competencies. Let's develop some skills and make sure that we're not, doing any harm, but that we also have the training, wondering what the future will hold. I just wonder if you've ever had anybody come to you and tell you that they use psychedelics in any kind of spiritual context or otherwise.
I used to attend this pretty conservative church, and I had somebody come up to me and talk about how they experienced, it wasn't psychedelics, but it was a different kind of drug. And they said, it was probably one of the deepest, most meaningful times that I've ever experienced God Almighty. And I was like, well, that's wonderful. And I joked with him. I was like, I can't do that. I'm a federal employee, so I'll get fired for that. But I'm so glad you have that freedom.
Right. Yes, actually, I have two really good friends who have gone to a few retreats where that was an option. That was the whole purpose, I think, of the retreat. And for them, I think they turned to it for help with anxiety and also with their relationship. She told me that it was life-changing for them. But now I'm curious to go back and talk with her about the spiritual side of that. What changes has she noticed, or what did she experience in a spiritual element? I do know that she feels like it really has helped all those, like the anxiety and the relationship building. And I feel like she feels like it's also changed her approach to life. So it made me curious to learn more about her experience too.
It'll be interesting to find out the longitudinal aspect of this, how things change over time. And going with that, like a lot of people have talked about revivals and known what happens with the revival 10, 20 years afterwards. Where are the people after that? And I'd love to find out more about, people who have had these beautiful, powerful experiences. I'd love to see, how has this transformed their lives and their experiences of the transcendent, of the immanent? What has happened? So I think that'd be a fascinating study that I have no doubt it's going to happen.
Well, John, do you have a quote for us today?
Yes. So this is a quote that's attributed to Harriet Tubman. As you know, if you search on the internet, you can find quotes that anyone has said. My favorite is, make sure you have important people with quotes so that you can sound smart on the internet. And that was attributed to Abraham Lincoln. But this one is attributed to Harriet Tubman, and I thought it was a beautiful one. I don't know if she actually said it, but I think it's just a beautiful sentiment. The quote is, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world." And so I hope we're able to change the world in a positive way, like Harriet did, as salt and light, as she did in the anti-slavery movement. So,
amen. Well, thank you all for listening. And as always, please remember to subscribe, to share the episode, to like, to leave us a review. That really makes a big difference. And thank you to you all who have taken the time to do that. We really appreciate you.
Feel free to call our voicemail. Our voicemail is area code 502-536-7508. That is 502-536-7508.
So we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye.